Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey, ADDers, it's Susan Coffin here at Attitude Magazine, and we're very, very fortunate today to have Zoe Kessler. She is going to be talking about a very important subject, midlife ADHD diagnosis in women, meet the challenges, unlock your potential, and find happiness. Zoe Kessler is a wonderful resource for anyone with ADHD. She's a best-selling author, a journalist, and a motivational speaker. She's a top blogger. Check her blog out at psychcentral.com. It's called ADHD from A to Zoe. And we're fortunate to have her as a frequent contributor to Attitude Magazine. She also has a wonderful book, which I can't wait to read, upcoming, be published in September, called ADHD According to Zoe, The Real Deal on Relationships, Finding Your Focus, and Finding Your Keys. So with that, let me turn it over to Zoe. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and I'd like to thank you as well for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about this session, and I wanted to thank Attitude Magazine because they've definitely been a real lifeline for me. So here we go. For the first slide, we're going to talk about the fact that girls historically have been much less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than boys, and I mean that can be a webinar unto itself, of course. But a few little points of that are that girls tend to be more of the inattentive type. We don't cause as much trouble, don't call as much attention to ourselves. But for me, if you're a woman with ADHD who's just as rambunctious as those boys and bouncing off the walls, I'm sorry to say you would still fall through the cracks. Historically, this was thought to be a childhood disorder and one that only boys experience. Well, no, we all know that that's not true. In adulthood, however, those numbers start to come up closer to 50-50 for men and women. So this is good. This is where our opportunities are coming in. Women are frequently misdiagnosed with look-alike conditions. And there are quite a few of them. I haven't listed them all here, but these are some of the most common ones: bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. Also, of course, we can throw menopause in there for women. And the reason I call it look-alike conditions is because there are some similar traits, similar challenges. ADHD can be trickier to detect, but nonetheless, it's extremely important that if there is an underlying ADHD, even if you do have, let's say, an anxiety disorder, you really won't get your full potential. You won't be able to maximize what you're capable of unless, of course, you address the ADHD as well. So that's extremely important, and it's just so important to find someone who can tease all these things out and approach them in a methodical sort of way. Now, we are diagnosed, women, at very key points in our lives. Either we're starting college and we've maybe, as I did, sort of gotten through high school on raw talent, as it were, but we get to college and, oops, we haven't developed any study skills, so we're overwhelmed, and we seek a diagnosis and some help. When we get married, when we have kids, after we've been promoted at our job, for us, that can sometimes be the worst thing that happened in our career, sort of ironically. During menopause, because again, there are lots of symptoms that will heighten our ADHD when we have menopause, and we're just over the top, and again, we have to seek some help. Now, for me, I was 47 years old, and my father had died, and he had, I now know, acted as a bit of an ad hoc ADHD coach for me. So I was lost without him. Where was my bouncing board? I also lost my job at that time, and it just really tipped the scale. So I did seek some counseling after a friend of mine suggested that maybe I should look into this. So I did. And when I did, I can tell you, I took my online questionnaire. I answered 4 questions of the Jasper Goldberg Adult ADD questionnaire. And on the next slide, I'll talk about now the roller coaster of emotions. At question 4, I was in a panic. I couldn't even understand why these questions were on the test, so it was quite dramatic. The next 2 weeks were full of emotions, one after the other. I was relieved. I was shocked. I was scared. I don't have children. I didn't know anything about ADHD, really, so it was a big learning curve. However, once I came to terms with it, I thought, you know what? Now my life can begin. Now I can start accepting myself. Now I can start respecting myself. And I understood that the reason I was spinning my wheels, well, there was a reason I was spinning my wheels. It wasn't for lack of trying, of course. And there was a neurobiological disorder. There was a brain-based situation that I could now address, and I could address it intelligently, and I could get help and support. Before, I was just sort of, boxing in the dark. So it was fantastic. Now, moms who are seeking treatment for their children will also start to recognize themselves and be diagnosed. Karen O'Donnell is a Canadian filmmaker. She made a fantastic documentary called A Mind Like Mine. It's practically like going to the movies and seeing a wonderful drama unfold, and yet it is documentary. And during this film, we watch Karen talk about her son who has quite pronounced ADD and her struggles with that. And sure enough, at a certain point in the filming, she says, uh-oh, I think I see myself here. And that's where the arc of the film changes. And I would highly recommend it for everybody, A Mind Like Mine. When a mom is diagnosed, as well as her child, this is also a huge opportunity because now you're partners. You can learn together. You can come up with treatment strategies, even as a family, coping skills, and you can work on creating a real strength-based family from which your child can go forth and you can rebuild your own self-esteem and confidence and really model coping strategies for your kids. So you learn to advocate for yourself if necessary, and you also teach your child to advocate for themselves, as well as, of course, you need to work with that too. But you can, again, model this for your child, and it's fantastic. So when you understand your ADHD, and let me say that again, when you understand your ADHD, because we all know that there are so many different traits, and mine are different than yours and in different levels. I mean, I think of it as having a big bag of ADHD symptoms or traits, and I reach my hand in and pull out 9 of them, and that's what I get. And you reach your hand and you might pull out, 7 or 8 or 9 different ones. But once you know whether it's disorganization or procrastination, and of course these are all listed on the next slide. Was that subtle? You won't be dealing with all of these, of course, but now you've got a game plan. You can decide what you need to focus on in terms of your ADHD traits. But one thing I want to emphasize is we're talking about midlife ADHD diagnosis in women. What does that mean? We've got a huge history, some of us for decades, preceding this diagnosis. So for me, I think a focus really needs to be on all the things, the emotions, the challenges, the stigma, the put-downs, the emotional things that happen that are undergirding the procrastination, the garden variety, feeling overwhelmed, financial challenge, all that ADHD stuff. Well, what about how you feel about it? What about your self-esteem? What about your self-talk? I think it's incredibly important to treat the ADHD in a conventional way, but also to get a handle on how you need to now rebuild self-confidence and understand that your whole self-perception now has an opportunity to grow and to become far more positive. And so finally, there is really good news. This webinar, I hope, will give every one of you something tangible and concrete to take home, to think about, to act on. But afterwards, I have created a list of resources, ones that I have found particularly helpful. In addition to Attitude, there are books, and I know a lot of us aren't readers. I'm a reader, but we have trouble with that as well. But there are blogs and lots of webinars and support groups, online forums, lots at Attitude. Of course, we have all these things and lots more. So we'll be sharing a list on Attitude's website of all those things as well. And if we have time, we'll talk about how to find a qualified medical practitioner to make the diagnosis and to help with the treatment. So I guess I want to finish by saying that, before my diagnosis, I really used to think of myself as less than other women. And that was painful. And now that I know what ADHD is and the effect it's had on my life and some strategies I can use to address the challenges, I won't allow myself to be less than I am. So I hope you also will embrace that concept when we're finished and going forward. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. That's a great introduction. Can we turn to this question of that moment, that diagnosis moment? Because I think it's such a eureka moment, just as you said, for so many women, and, you know, so frequently associated, as you mentioned, with children's diagnosis, their child's diagnosis. There are a number of really wonderful questions on the webinar already about this topic. One person, this is Gina, said, my 6.5-year-old son was diagnosed with combined ADHD about 2 months ago, and I really believe that I have the condition also. I went for an evaluation, but they basically think I'm functioning far too well, and maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's a little obsessive tendencies. You know, what do I do? I'm annoyed by this reaction. How do I proceed?
Exactly. Okay, the way that I would handle that is, of course, you're disappointed and frustrated. Absolutely. And I do think that we need to give ourselves as women credit for being much more instinctive and intuitive about what's going on with us. And that's one of the most frustrating things when you're not diagnosed. You know there's something going on, but what is it? So if you really do think it's ADHD, Gina, I think here are two things. First, learn as much as you can about adult ADHD to the point where you're more educated than the physician that you're dealing with, so that you can present your case in a compelling manner. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I wrote this in my book as well about finding a diagnostician as well as a treating physician. We really need to make our case, and in many cases, I'm sorry to say, we need to educate the doctors, the psychiatrists, because education around adult ADHD is not, honestly, I don't know what it's like in the States, but in Canada, I asked a psychiatrist when I was interviewing for my book how much education they got. He said, well, we have 2 to 3 hours within the section on childhood ADHD about adult ADHD. So educate yourself and pinpoint what it is that are the most, how can I put this, the most challenging things for you, and seek out your own strategies, you know, prior to getting the diagnosis. And also, so there was frustration because they didn't see it. Oh, I had another great suggestion. Of course, I'm having one of those blank out moments.
Well, no, I think that's a great suggestion right there. Just learn everything you can about ADD. Let me just make one note. Someone asked whether, for the purposes of this webinar, there was a distinction between ADD, inattentive, and ADHD.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad someone asked that, because I wanted to clarify that I will be using the term ADHD as a generic term for whether or not you're hyperactive. I will use it. I mean, partly because I own it. I do have the hyperactivity, but I mean, it's semantics. So I'm just going to go with ADHD, but I definitely am referring to whether or not you have hyperactivity. You'll know what's the most applicable for your situation.
Okay. On the diagnosis moment, there's a wonderful question here, which is, what are the first steps I should take? And I'm reminded of the autism community, which has a wonderful site, a wonderful sort of section called The First 100 Days After an Autism Diagnosis. I mean, what are the first steps? You think you have ADD and ADHD, and what do you do? I think your point about the emotional consequences are terrific.
Is the question about the first steps after you've received a diagnosis, or?
It's, you know, you think you have a diagnosis, or maybe you even have a diagnosis. What should you do next?
Oh, okay. Well, I see those as two distinct things. So let me try and tackle them both. I mean, if you have a formal diagnosis, obviously that's like your pre-ADHD, that's closure on the pre-ADHD life. So you have a whole new beginning ahead of you. If you don't have your diagnosis, get it. Please seek out a diagnosis, because then you know what you're dealing with. And it's so important to rule out those look-alike conditions that we talked about earlier. I mean, is your thyroid out of whack, right? Are you menopausal? So before seeing an expert, you yourself can sit quietly and think about, have these behaviors and challenges been happening since I was 12, since I was 6? What was I like as a kid? I pulled out all my old report cards. Well, you know what, the writing on the wall, well, there it was, it was all over the place. So get a diagnosis. I think that's the most important thing. And then, yes, I really think we need to honor our emotional process, because we're motivated, we're ambitious, we have goals, and if we've been spinning our wheels for 47 years, let's get at it. Let's get at my life goals. I'm going to get disorganized or organized. I'm going to learn how to manage my time. But if you're trying to tackle those things, and in the meantime you haven't allowed yourself to grieve, or maybe you're angry that nobody's diagnosed you until now, that is going to color how you go forward. I think we need to recognize and work through our emotions about our diagnosis and give ourselves the time. And if it's taken you 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years to get your diagnosis, you can afford to take an afternoon, a week, a couple months, however long it takes to get in touch with your feelings, and then to have a clear-headed vision of, all right, here's the biggest bugaboo in my life. It's time management. I'm all over the map. Start dealing with that. Chip away at it.
Do you have any recommendations for the kinds of professionals that women might seek out? Coach, therapist?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If what I'm saying resonates with you, then cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be, and by shown to be, I mean it has been quite well researched in a new book that just came out called Fast Minds. It's terrific, by Dr. Craig Sermon and Dr. Tim Bilkey. They have a little section on cognitive behavioral therapy and talk about how it has been researched and it's adequately demonstrated that it does reduce ADHD symptoms. And the way it does it is it's a form of talk therapy based on the theory of how we think and feel being interrelated, and that they affect how we behave. So that's really right up my alley, about talking about reframing how you feel about yourself. If you're not feeling empowered to put into place ADHD strategies of organization, if you feel that, well, I've been failing for 40 years, why do I think this is going to change? That was one of my fears when I got my diagnosis. Does this mean nothing? Well, my worst case scenario was, okay, great, I have a diagnosis. Is it really going to get better? What if it doesn't? That was a nightmare. And if you think that for 1 second, get it out of your head, because it will get better. And just don't go there. So
we actually have that very question, amazingly, from Katina, who says, I got diagnosed after my son's diagnosis in 2006. He's doing really well, and I'm just stuck. How do I get past this without driving everyone crazy? I'm not sure what she means by driving everyone crazy, but she feels just stuck. So
the diagnosis was in 2006?
2006. Mm-hmm. And her son's doing well. They both were diagnosed. Her son's doing well. She's stuck. Feels like she's not making any progress.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's put it this way. Her situation, Katrina?
Yes, so Katina.
Yeah. Okay, the situation's different. I think it's really important to take a clear-headed vision of, if you're feeling stuck, what are the goals that aren't being met? Your son may be doing better at school because you're doing a terrific job of coaching him. How can you apply that coaching to yourself? And also, how old is his son?
Doesn't say.
Doesn't say? I really like the idea of using a family systems approach. There are some fantastic blogs out there. One by, it's called Queen of the Distracted. This is a woman who doesn't have ADHD. She's got 7 children, 6 of whom do, and her husband has ADHD. She's got lots of great coping tips and anecdotes, and the family is all coming along and functioning and supporting each other well together. So I would suggest that once it's recognized what has been helping with her son, then maybe mom needs a coach as well.
Right.
Because I'll tell you, for 7 years of research, and I can't count how many interviews with women and professionals, I have come to the conclusion that the make or break thing in a person with ADHD's life at the beginning is someone acting as an ad hoc coach, whether or not you're diagnosed. For me, that was my dad. Everyone I've spoken with who's a high achiever and nonetheless has ADHD, someone, a mom, a dad, a teacher, someone has coached them in their childhood. So maybe mom needs a coach as well.
That's really interesting. You just can't deal with this on your own. You really need support. I think that's...
Mm-hmm. And let's face it, the complexities of adulthood. She's managing her own life and her child's or children's or who knows, and I don't know what the household's comprised of, but it's a different order of things. Right.
Exactly.
So, and without knowing the specific, difficulties, that's probably the best sort of general direction I would take.
Just before we leave this diagnosis issue, which I think, we can move on, but there are a couple of people who are raising the comorbidity question. One very classic story from Diana. I've been diagnosed with severe depression, but it's clear that I scored 100% on, online tests for adult ADHD. My physician insists that I need to be treated for depression. What else? What can I do? And others who say, could I have more than one condition, and what do I do to tease those apart?
Oh, that's such a fantastic question. First of all, yes, I'm not sure the percentage. There are different quotes around how many of us do have coexisting conditions, and it's up there. It's close to sometimes 85%. I haven't had any identified, although some might argue with that, but I have really pronounced ADHD, but that's an anomaly. That's not the norm. The norm is that we have at least one or more. Depression is definitely one of the more often diagnosed ones, but that doesn't mean we don't have ADHD. And in fact, sometimes it's depression subsequent to living a life with ADHD, and it's not really clinical depression. So yes, find someone who can tease that apart. How do we do that? Well, is there an ADHD clinic in your city? If there's an ADHD clinic, you've got professionals who all of a sudden are not only trained, they're trained, they have the experience, they know the literature, that is their clientele. If there's an ADHD clinic, I would contact them and see if you can go for an assessment or some preliminary meeting there. Support groups. Go to support groups, because if there's a local support group such as CHAD or another one in your area, there are adults with ADHD there. They have physicians. They have psychiatrists. Network. Find out who likes their doc and why, and get a referral. Your child's pediatrician or psychiatrist or whoever is treating their ADHD, some of these doctors will also treat adults. And if they themselves will not treat an adult, they can make referrals. Usually they can make a referral as well to someone who will. Ask your family. Depression, seems to, I'm not an expert on depression, but if others in the family also have depression or ADHD, talk to them, see if they have a physician or someone they know who would be better able to tease apart the different challenges and know. And again, this is one of those education things. Find out all you can and approach your doctor again and present this to him and say, look, until we've dealt with my ADHD, the depression, they go hand in hand. And the ADHD has to be addressed separately. Yes, they dovetail. Yes, there are some overlapped areas, but it would be depressing just to know that you've got this roadblock. Okay,
and just to chime in and support what Zoe's saying, I think if you do actually have more than one condition, and someone on the webinar is saying she's been diagnosed with bipolar disease and is being treated for it, but still has untreated ADHD, you certainly can find someone to treat more than one condition. That's totally within the realm of the norm for ADHD physicians who, as Zoe says, do expect to see comorbidities more than one condition. So Don't let that ADHD go, even if you've been diagnosed with bipolar disease, depression, whatever else. That's a really good point.
Absolutely. This webinar is about maximizing our potential, and that's how you do it. Yeah.
A question here about, and actually several questions here about, is there a national directory of ADHD clinics? Is there a website that lists doctors by location? I'll just say that we have one on attitudemag.com. There's one on CHAD, a terrific one on CHAD. I don't know.
I would also go to ADA as well. That's Attention Deficit Disorder Association.
.org, I believe, ADA. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the answer to that is yes.
Yes, there is. Yeah. So yes, definitely look for an experienced person.
And oftentimes in a book on ADHD, in the back, there'll be resources listed as well. So pick up a book that's been, that's been published this year or last, and you'll get some up-to-date resources.
Okay, yeah.
And also there are some listed on the sheet that, or on the information that we're putting on the website. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Questions here about hormones, specifically perimenopause, puberty, and the diagnosis of ADD or ADHD in as related to with changes in women's hormone levels.
Hurrah! This is so important. This is so important for women. Okay, there's a whole chapter in my book on this, ADHD According to Zoe, which is sort of interesting considering there's hardly any research about it. Historically, in fact, Dr. Patricia Quinn, who is, of course, marvelous, and especially focusing on understanding women and girls with ADHD, she's written about this, about the fact that research is really lacking on women as opposed to groups of men and women. So we need more research. That's starting to happen, thank goodness. But here's ADHD in women and men is different. Some will argue with that. Here's an example. Dr. Quinn says when boys' symptoms worsen, and this is children now, but it often helps to increase the level of stimulant medication, but this approach frequently fails when applied to women in perimenopause or girls who have started menstruating. Ding! So, that's a preliminary finding. But tell me this, if it's not different, why would there be a clinic in downtown Toronto, the first ever, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, clinic for women with ADHD, and again, this is Dr. Bilkey's incarnation. He has a new questionnaire out called Fast Minds Female Questionnaire. I'm going to read you a couple of these questions. Under childhood, were you a tomboy? Tick that one for me. Under adolescence, when you started to have regular biological cycles, menstruation, did your behavior change? Did your moods become unstable? Did you become overreactive and sensitive, and so on and so forth? Were you sexually impulsive? I'm a woman. I have huge impulsivity. When I was undiagnosed with ADHD, the statistics are clear about unplanned pregnancies. Well, if you're highly impulsive, and if your hormones are raging, and your libido is up there, hormones are such an important part throughout a woman's lifespan, and we have to understand it each step of the way. On this questionnaire, do you have severe PMS? Have you ever been pregnant? And so on and so on and so on. Yes, we need to talk about hormones and their impact on women with ADHD. So let's look at adolescence. It's complicated. If a woman's libido is strongest during adolescence and young adulthood, and if symptoms like impulsivity and low self-esteem and an impaired ability to learn from the past, which is faulty executive functioning, classic ADHD, you combine that with the ADHD, and there are your unwanted pregnancies, your impulsivity, there are more sexually transmitted diseases. On the other hand, it's complicated. The book called Vagina, A New Biography by Naomi Wolf came out in 2012. She talks about dopamine. I read this book and it blew my mind. I saw ADHD, I saw low levels of dopamine, which are a hallmark of ADHD, can cause lowered libido and depression. So you have low levels of dopamine to begin with, but your dopamine is also being lowered at certain times of your menstrual cycle. It's a very interesting book, and I would highly recommend it. PMS, mood swings. Well, what does PMS and ADHD have in common? When we look at the research that's now coming out about girls with ADHD and women, the girls are more reactive than the boys emotionally in school. As adults and even as children, we can have irritability and angry outbursts. I was very moody, and that is all a part of ADHD, but it's also a part of PMS. So yes, we're starting to find that women who have ADHD also have more pronounced PMS. Well, why wouldn't we? And this happened to me all throughout my life. So let's get into perimenopause. I mean, we've only got an hour, right? So we could, we could do a whole webinar on this, but I'm just giving you some little highlights here.
Sure.
An hour. Adulthood, perimenopause. Well, what's that? Memory problems. Does any of this sound familiar with ADHD? Word retrieval during conversations and writing, mental fogginess, irritability. Again, is it ADHD? Is it perimenopause? It's both. We're doubly blessed. Menopause. Your estrogen level is going to drop by about 65% after menopause. You're going to have lower dopamine and serotonin. Now, wait a minute. Serotonin, depression. What do we know about that? Okay, so I've already got lower dopamine and it's going to drop more. Okay, what's the result? Diminished mental clarity, difficulty concentrating, distraction, anyone? Dysthymia, and depression. So, as a woman with ADHD, as a woman who had very bad PMS, as someone who's been researching this for years, I really truly believe there is absolutely, of course, there's a connection between our hormonal fluctuations across our lifespan and our ADHD. How exactly does that play out in our brain? There isn't enough research to really explain all that, but it's coming. So I think the main thing is treat your ADHD. Understand how that impacts your hormonal changes. And, okay, we'll get into, I was going to talk about some alternative treatments. One of the best ways to stabilize your mood is meditation. I know, some of you are yawning already. Is anyone already asleep? Meditation.
No, someone did ask about meditation, Ashley, so you're right on target here. Yep.
Meditation, ooh, don't make me sit still. I am so hyperactive. Well, guess what? There's lots of different kinds of meditation. And the one that I found that worked for years for me before my diagnosis involves chanting out loud, rubbing beads, holding beads in my hands, looking at a mandala. I mean, I'm looking, I'm making noise, I'm sitting there, I'm moving around. How can this be meditation? It was fabulous. And I can tell you, as a mood stabilizer, my father, who never used to ever make comments like this, once said to me, you know, you're much nicer when you chant. I couldn't believe it. But he was right. He was right. I just felt that my moods were on a more even keel. It actually altered my perception of time insofar as I had more hours in the day. I can't tell you about the benefits I gained from that. Herbs. You can, there are some herbs, and I am not an herbalist, and you really do need to speak with someone who knows the medicinal properties of herbs, as well as has a physician who also knows about your medications and so on. It's a little tricky, but I can tell you there are natural herbs out there. You can grow them in your backyard, make an infusion. No, I'm not prescribing. I'm not an herbalist. I don't want to get anyone in trouble here, but there are some that can help with your moods. Motherwort is one of them. Lemon balm is great in a tea to help you sleep. But, you know, obviously you need to consult someone to make sure it's okay for you and your body. Diet. Delivered from Distraction, written by, it's the follow-up to Driven to Distraction by Ned Hallowell and Dr. John Rady. There's a whole chapter on nutrition, and in one of them mentions blue-green algae to improve cognition and memory. So, hey, if you have perimenopause or you're in menopause, maybe you want to try that out. For me, I can't get around the algae part, so I'm like, I don't know about that. But, I mean, you know, I don't know. I just, whatever. If you're braver than me.
Point. You know, let me recommend Dr. Sandy Newmark, Newmark. He's conducted 2 wonderful webinars, very popular on Attitude's website, about, his book is called ADHD Without Medications, and he is just really terrific on the specifics of diet, nutrition, and herbs. Just,
Great.
Mainstream doctor, integrative doctor in San Francisco, very well qualified. And I think it got some great advice. So just to support what Zoe's saying, I think it's really important.
Good. And then two more. Exercise. I just want to get to two more. Exercise. That will stabilize your moods. There's lots of research. We know that this works. It will keep you calm. It'll help you sleep better. And again, cognitive behavioral therapy. If you speak to yourself in a kind, gentle, soothing, understanding way, the way I did that through PMS was, it's only going to last 3 days. Don't get too depressed. Otherwise, I would. So I just kept reminding myself, this is going to be over in 3 days, and bang, like clockwork. Of course it was. My hormones shifted. Anyway, thank you.
Right. What about neurofeedback? People are wondering.
Oh, I think I did mention that. Neurofeedback. Again, I am not a specialist in neurofeedback. I've done, obviously, some reading about it, and Dr. Bilkey mentions in his book, Fast Minds, about neurofeedback, that the research, no, maybe I didn't, but anyway, the research isn't as conclusive. I'm looking at his book now, and he said in one study of adults with ADHD, researchers concluded that evidence for the effectiveness of neurofeedback is promising, but weak. So we need more research. So he says if you choose neurofeedback, then he's recommending a center certified by an association such as the Biofeedback Certification Institute of America, and you can find them online. So that's the Biofeedback Certification Institute of America, and he says they will offer tips for you to learn more about it. But hey, try it. Oh, except that I have to say that the other thing that they note is that other researchers are saying that there are more effective treatments, or there may be, that cost less. So you need to think about how much time you have, how much energy, how much money. It's a matter of trial and error. And again, ADHD is as individual as you and I. On the other hand, we all recognize each other in a crowd, don't we?
Yeah. Can we turn to family relationships?
Oh, yes.
We have some questions about family members. So here's one. How do you suggest dealing with family members who just don't understand or even act like they don't care? Or it doesn't matter. They expect me to just be like everyone else. That's a typical one. There are some other ones as well on the question of family members, just people not being supportive in the close family.
Absolutely. And I do get that question a lot on my blog and elsewhere. It's heartbreaking. It's such a hard question to hear, and yet I completely resonate with it in the sense that we all want to be accepted for who we are. Of course we do. But this is another part of the opportunity of a diagnosis of ADHD. First of all, I'm sorry if this sounds hardcore, but your diagnosis is for you. It's not for your family. It's for you primarily. It's for you to become the best that you can be. That's number one. It's really important that you remember that. It's like in a dysfunctional family with any kind of trouble, if one steps outside of that and heals and begins to move forward, everyone else in that culture of the family is challenged by that. They either step up to the plate and grow with you, or they fight you because they don't want to change what they've believed and what they've thought, all along. So here are some solutions to that. If these conversations with your friends and your family are more painful than helpful, you can tell them that you're not comfortable with discussing it at this time, and that's not something that you're going to discuss with them. And I know we want to be accepted for who we are, but maybe you need a support group instead, or a really good friend who loves you as you are to discuss it with. The other thing is, you want your family to accept you just as you are, but are you willing to give them that? If that's something you want them to give you, you need to be willing to give that to them. And just as they are right now, is that they can't wrap their heads around it. They can't speak to you in a respectful way about it. And I want to talk about that. This is all tying in together, of course. You've been diagnosed late in life. Do you have a history of being bullied or criticized? Do you have a history of being belittled or put down or called names or stigma? Maybe you do. But maybe that diagnosis unlocks the key to saying, you know what? I won't let anyone speak to me like that anymore. I won't let anybody criticize me or disrespect me, and that includes family. Why is that okay? It's not okay. So this is another thing your diagnosis will open up to. Again, it's that reframing of who you are. All of a sudden you know, hey, I've got this neurobiological condition. I'm not lazy. I'm not unmotivated. I'm not any of those horrible things I've been called. Yes, I am speaking from experience here. And if that's going to continue, it's really important to start to rebuild your self-esteem. You need to accept yourself with your ADHD. Maybe with your family it's not a subject, you can't go there. Enjoy what you can with your family. Enjoy the things that you can talk about. It's not about changing them. It's about changing you. It's about making your life better. And when they see you start to succeed where before you failed, when they see how happy you are, when they see your confidence come back, when they see where you're going with your life, maybe you have that conversation again. I mean, with me it was, hey, I tried organic food, exercise, meditation, yoga, you name it, I did it. I have my tarot cards read. And I was spinning my wheels and falling apart. And then I got my diagnosis. So if you don't believe in ADHD in adults, that's okay. I love and respect you for who you are. But this is what I believe. And if you can't speak respectfully to me about it, let's not talk about it. Do you see what I mean? It's just so important because you're working to try and not be bullied anymore, not be... Anyway, I think I made my point. But I mean, let's face it, ADHD in women is so new. When I ran into a friend after 20 years, a high school friend, hadn't seen each other for 20 years, and I'd just been diagnosed, so I told her, of course, I'm blurting it out, and she said, but you're not a 12-year-old boy. This was not that long ago.
No, I think that's still the myth. It's Dr. Tom Brown said, it's Dennis the Menace. That's it's a rambunctious boy. That's the
Well, and the other problem too is that women, again, we do behave differently with our ADHD. We internalize. We become shamed. We compensate for our ADHD. We hide it, and it becomes more of an emotional challenge for us because we feel ashamed of it, and so it doesn't get detected. So we overcompensate. And high achievers, same thing. So you're a high, powerful, you're in a powerful position, you're an executive, whatever you are, and your family goes, well, you can't have ADHD. Are you kidding me? Again, learn about ADHD so that you can calmly say to them, I understand where you're coming from. I thought the same thing, but here's my reality. Here's what you don't see. These are the challenges I have, and this is what I'm struggling with.
One of the things that's come up is, and here's a really good way that someone's put it, my friends accuse me of using ADHD as a crutch. So I don't want to use it as a crutch. What do? Do I educate them? How do I handle the fact that it's assumed that if I do talk about ADHD, I'm using it to avoid responsibility or avoid getting things done?
Mm-hmm. I did read that question online, and it just... I don't know if this person is a hugger. I just want to give her a hug. I just want to sit her down and say, you know what? This question, how do I keep from really using it as a crutch? That says to me, okay, we've got to work on trusting ourselves and self-esteem, and I sure had to do that. When I was a child undiagnosed with ADHD, we women, I think a lot of us are so undermined that we learn to question ourselves. Our sense of being able to trust ourselves is really undermined. So the question, how do I keep from using it as a crutch? Well, you're not using it as a crutch, so we need to build that confidence. And what about these friends who are saying you do use it as a crutch? Well, you need to reevaluate. Again, go back to what have you accepted in your life up till now, because maybe you didn't feel you had a choice because you didn't know about ADHD, but now that you do know, is it acceptable what's a friend to you? It's okay to look at that and say, is a friend someone who accepts me exactly as I am? I've got a friend, believe it or not. I teased her that I was going to give out her phone number during this webinar. Here's your new best friend. She thinks ADHD is great. She doesn't have it. She gets a kick out of it. And she works with her friends who have it okay, she confessed. Sometimes she lies to them and says, well, we need to meet at 7:30 when it's really, 8 o'clock. But it works. And lots of people do that. So to me, a friend accepts my ADHD, loves me as I am. It doesn't mean that it is my responsibility to arrive on time. And that's where treatment comes into play. I do my part. I do my best with treatment and to get a handle on the things that I need to get a handle on. And my friends love me, and they love the good parts. They love the fun, the creativity, the laughter, the good craziness. So think about your friends. Again, I go back to that respect thing. I won't have anyone talk to me like that. I know that this is not a crutch. I've explained ADHD to you. Maybe you need new friends. I don't know. Is that hardcore? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's to the point of how do you help other people see this, as someone else asked, see ADHD as a positive rather than a negative, or even just to accept it. Obviously, it's a tough one.
Well, and again, work together, enlist your friends, say, hey, you know what? You're right. I have this problem of, say, not getting to our meeting on time. If I do this for you, will you do this for me? In fact, that woman I mentioned earlier, Karen O'Donnell, she does that with some of her friends. They call her up and remind her of things, and then she'll do something for them. So make sure that it's a barter so nobody feels like they're doing, something without anything in return, but maybe your friends will help you. I wrote an article for Attitude, actually, about friends being a really good treatment, part of your treatment plan, and it's on the list of resources. I would really recommend that everybody reads that to see how the right kind of friends, not right, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but what I mean is a healthy, supportive friend will work with you.
That makes sense, absolutely. I'm going to turn now to careers. A number of people have asked about that, and a question here from someone who says, I was just fired again last Friday because I just can't do things exactly the way others want me to. I just want to be a fine artist, but there's no structure in that at all. What do I do to be a contributing member to society?
For someone without kids, I have such strong maternal instincts. I want to hug her too. Okay, number one, I'm a writer. And the best thing I ever did for myself after my diagnosis was finally say, since I was 9, all I wanted to do was write books, and I don't care if I starve. I don't have children, so I could take more risks, perhaps, than some. But it was the best thing I did. And as far as structure goes, wait, let me relate that to ADHD. What I'm trying to say is that what you're the most passionate about is your best shot at success. Okay, so I've been fired from jobs. A lot of us have. It's classic. But when you do take that leap of faith, and again, building the confidence and taking a risk, and you put that energy and intelligence and drive into that passion, it's like that Goethe saying, all things in the universe will come, and it'll just shock you at how things will fall into place. Or I'm not saying it'll be perfect, but it's worth it. It's really worth it if there's any way you can do it. Even if you can't do that full time, you've got to be able to express your creativity and your passion. That goes for all of us. Find a way. Take a course, carve out an afternoon, however you can do it. As far as working for others, a lot of us have difficulties with that because let's face it, a lot of us aren't 9-to-5ers. We're just not. And as far as structure goes, frankly, I know this is a bit radical, but I think it's overrated. I really do. As a person who works for themselves at home writing, oh yeah, I need structure. Sure I do. I need to meet deadlines, and that's great for structure. I need to put out proposals. I need to have all those sort of businessy things in place to keep me afloat. But within the structure, I need a lot of unstructured time. I need to go walk in the woods. I need to feed my creative self. So I really think there's opportunity here for Allison, or for this question. How do you learn to accept you aren't broken? Well, you're not broken. You're different. You're different, and you've got different capabilities and different potentials, and you've got talents, and identify what the things are that you're good at. Dr. Hallowell says this all the time, Nat, go with those.
Right.
And you are fantastically fine the way you are. And maybe it didn't fit in the job that you got fired from. So it's really important, if you really want to be an artist, find a way.
Right. Here's Julie, who's 23, and she says, I'm a recent graduate with inattentive ADHD, and I'm trying to market myself. I need a job now, and I'm not very marketable. Do you tell people you have ADHD? Do you admit to being disorganized, bad at time management, and never truly gather 100% of the information in a conversation? Julie's wondering how to market herself now that she knows she has ADHD.
I love that one. That's great. Thank you so much, Julie. So I think, and maybe Susan, you can help me with this, are we, in terms of marketing, I think maybe what we're talking about is presenting oneself at an interview. Is that closer?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so I think what I want to say is, I probably need to hear that again. Hello, meds are wearing off. There was something in there about not being presentable. I'm not really, that can be taken in so many different ways. So
yeah, I think she's saying that she doesn't know how to present herself and her skills.
See. Right, thank you.
She's wondering, does she point out the ADHD problems or not? I think.
All right. Oh, there's so much to say on this. Another webinar is coming on. Right. When I blogged about coming out with ADHD at work, I was nailed. It's overwhelmingly the case that people do not want to say that they have ADHD at work, and there's good reason. I know of professionals, very high-level professionals, who have been fired when but that doesn't always happen. So here was my workaround. Here's my workaround in other situations. Instead of saying, when I was hired for the job where I told them I had ADHD, I'd been working there for 3 years. I wasn't on my meds for 3 days, and I made a mistake I had never made before. That's when I lost it, and I told them. But when they hired me, instead of saying, oh, by the way, I have ADHD, I told them what my challenges were, but I would say, when you teach me something, I'm not 20 years old. I try to put some humor in there. I'm not 20 years old. You might have to tell me more than once, and I need you to show me. I told them how I learned best. That's how I shared it. And don't forget, I did get the job. I reframed to them what my challenges were in a way that I was upfront, but I never used the words ADHD. I said, look, it will take me longer to learn things, but once I learn, I'm great. What else did I say? I can't even, that conversation was so long ago, but I found ways to tell them what some of my challenges were, and then I gave them the ways that we could work together to overcome those. So that's one approach.
So what you did was address the issues without ever labeling yourself. That sounds reasonable, right? And someone else has chimed in hearing this part of the conversation, saying, put a positive spin on your ADHD traits, offering that to Julie as another way to go about this. But I think what you're saying, Zoe, is addressing where you're going to need help.
I don't know about everyone else, but some of my ADHD traits are not that positive. I mean, when I show up late at work, it's still not really well received. Trust me on that. But I fully appreciate what that person is saying, that absolutely you can put a positive spin on a lot of things, but I think being upfront about what your challenges are and finding a good job fit. There's no point in trying to land something, because that's not a good idea for anyone, but we've been muddling our ways through our life up until our diagnosis in midlife. Do you really want to go on with that kind of modus operandi? I don't think so. Because now you've got the opportunity to be really diagnostic and forensic about what am I dealing with, what are my strengths, what are the workarounds, and what are things I just don't really want to be in the position to have to deal with. And there will be something for you to do that you will flourish in and you will love. There really will.
I think that's absolutely right. Just hard sometimes to get there, but you will get there. We are very unfortunately running out of time, and there's one last question that I wanted to ask you, Zoe, and to answer, and then to add anything else you'd like to say as we end this webinar. And this is from someone who says, I've spent my whole lifetime feeling that I was less than. What do I do to turn that around?
Well, exactly. And I think, again, the key, and that's how I felt too. I felt I was less than other women. I mean, I couldn't keep my house straight. I couldn't organize things. I couldn't be anywhere on time. I seemed to mess up friendships because I would impulsively blurt, unfortunate things. What you can do is get a treatment in place for your ADHD that really works for you, is to go back and think about the lessons you've learned before you were diagnosed. What were you taught about yourself that isn't true? What were you taught about yourself that in your gut is really not who you are? You don't need to feel less than anyone, because you're absolutely not. And that is not a platitude. Nobody's less than anyone else. And nobody is. Nobody is. We have our own sets and our own of traits and personalities. So what we need to do, for example, I consider myself to be a very unconventional woman, and I know some women with ADHD can really put themselves together and look gorgeous and have matching this and that. Well, first of all, I can barely get organized enough to have a shower. I'm sorry. I know that's disgusting. But, I accept who I am, and I like my quirkiness. So learn to like yourself. I have great friends. I'm very well loved, and I'm very blessed. But I'm not Martha Stewart by any stretch, right? And I'm not I'm not a lot of things, but I am some other things that, I really like. Find those things in yourself.
Absolutely. Well, learn to love yourself. There can't be better advice than that. And check out her blog, ADHD to Zoe, on psychcentral.com. Please go to attitudemag.com and put Zoe Kessler in the search box, and her articles will come up. So with that, we will sign off with many thanks to Zoe, and good luck to all of us in becoming the people that we want to be. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Attitude Magazine. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
For more Attitude podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.